Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Who We Are podcast. Today I am so excited and so honored to have with us Sadhana to come and share her experience, her journey and her reflections. I got to know about Sadhana earlier this year when my younger brother, who's also in the industry, shared with me about her story, her journey, and how she left a high-profile legal career to dedicate her life to pro bono work. So Sadhana, welcome to the show and I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm also excited to be here.
Yeah. So for those of us who may not be as familiar with you and your journey, could you share with us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. When I first started, I was in private practice. So I think this was way back in 2012 when I first started. And I mean, I thought I had the dream job. Mm-hmm. And in all aspects, it really was the dream job. I was working with quite a prominent senior counsel, someone, and I've repeated this everywhere. I really thought he was and is actually one of the best lawyers. And I had the opportunity to watch and learn from him. And I learned so much in that 3-year period. And it was the dream, you know, graduate law school, work in a big law firm, and then, you know, work the long hours, then hopefully you get somewhere.
Yeah.
But I think at some point I started to get exhausted. I was learning a lot. I felt like I had gained a lot from it, but I also felt a certain sense of hollowness. Yeah. And I started questioning, like, really, is this going to be, you know, the end game? Is this, yeah, exactly. Is this going to be what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? And I think at that point when I felt that exhaustion, I thought, okay, better to take a stop and do the millennial thing, which is, you know, reflect, ponder on life, take a break, right?
Wow.
And I did do that. I didn't actually have another job lined up at that time. So I think in 2015, when I quit, I had no idea what I was going to do. And I think the universe has its ways and, you know, just led me to another lawyer, senior lawyer, who then directed me to Pro Bono SG. And that was how my journey began. I started as a pro bono criminal lawyer in what we call the criminal legal aid scheme.
Yeah.
And that's how the past 10 years have been in
and
pro bono.
Today, you are the head of representation in
Yes.
Pro Bono SG. So I can't wait to delve deeper into that.
Sure.
But before we go further, I also want to ask, you know, Sadhana, could you bring us back even further to your growing up years? What was it like?
I always believe at heart I'm a HDB girl. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood school. I had the time of my life. My best friends are still my best friends right now, actually. So it was a very simple childhood. By no means were we born into poverty, but I've seen how my parents work, and my parents didn't have the same privileges that we did. So for us to get access to an education, stable family background, stable family unit, a mother, father who cared for us, who loved us, I always took that for granted, you know. So I had a really happy childhood. My brother, me, my parents, we were just the model Singapore family unit, living in a 4-room, then subsequently 5-room HDB flat. You know, it's a very beautiful growing up experience. I've now come to learn that not everyone gets access to that. So the growing up process for me was to me it was the ideal childhood. I couldn't have asked for anything more. But I was also very sheltered in a way. I didn't really see some of the struggles that some of my peers may have been experiencing. To me, it's just everybody's happy. Everybody has, you know, parents. Everybody has food on the table. Everybody has, you know, basic necessities. We all take the train. We all take the bus, you know. And you don't really see some of the struggles. Sometimes people struggle to put food on the table. People struggle with abusive parents. People are trapped in generations of abuse, right? And this perpetuates as the generations move on. We carry some of this trauma with us, right? So I think I only started becoming alive to that much later on.
And, you know, growing up also, what were some of your childhood dreams?
Okay, so I always tell people I always wanted to be a lawyer. Okay?
Really?
So,
even at a young age?
Even at a very young age.
What drew you to it?
I think, okay, Indian parents tend to do this. They ingrain it, right? It's very subtle, it's very covert, it's very brilliant also.
But they planted the seed early on. May I ask, what were your parents working as?
So my mom was a customer service agent, and my dad actually drives a lorry. He used to drive a lorry. Now he does some other things,
Amazing.
But he...
So they were not lawyers themselves?
No, they were not, yeah.
And so then from young, you've always known that you wanted to be a lawyer.
I think the way they ingrained it in me was they would say like, oh, you like to argue, you should be a lawyer. Your uncle is a lawyer, you should be a lawyer,
Yeah.
And that's how they started. A very young age, but I think I also inherently felt it in me that every time something didn't feel right, I felt that need to just
Stand up
argue for it.
Yeah.
Like why? But why? And you question and you start pushing and you start thinking. And I think my parents did encourage that as well. They encouraged the freedom to explore. For what it's worth, as much as I make fun of my parents for being Indian parents, they didn't force me into any particular area of study or any particular CCA. You must do this in order to succeed. They actually quite left me to my own devices to explore what I wanted to do. So I ended up doing a range of things, right? I went to the symphonic band, I played netball, and then I joined debates.
You've tried it all.
I tried to do a bunch of
Intellectually
things.
stimulating, physically stimulating, creatively stimulating.
Yeah, but I didn't know I was doing that, you see. I was just
Amazing.
curious
Yeah.
about all these things.
Yeah.
And no, my parents didn't force us to do any of these things. So I think being given the freedom and the flexibility to explore was so important at a very young age, because then you nurture that curiosity. And as you grow older,
Absolutely.
it becomes something that's so ingrained in you as
That's
well.
a great parenting tip.
I don't think they knew that they were doing that. I think they were just like, go to school,
Yeah.
give us a break.
It worked. It worked.
It worked, yeah.
What motivated you to give up, this prestigious and lucrative position in commercial litigation to pursue a career that's dedicated to pro bono work?
I didn't feel like I was giving up anything. For me, that the prestigious position in the big firm had its perks, had its draws and pros and cons, and that was a time that I enjoyed, and it came to an end, and I needed something different. And to me, the pro bono career is equally prestigious in its own way.
Amazing.
Because it allowed me to really grow. I felt like I bloomed as a lawyer in that position, because my bosses at the time gave me the flexibility to take on the cases that I wanted to take on, to run cases. I was fairly independent in the way that I appeared before court. Of course, I had guidance from senior lawyers as well, who would tell me, okay, maybe try this approach, try that strategy.
Yeah.
But I think I grew in this position as a criminal lawyer at Pro Bono SG. And so both careers had its perks, but I think what drew me to this and has kept me here is that I found my sense of purpose. I found the thing that feeds my soul.
Wow.
And that to me is very important. You need to be able to wake up in the morning and say, okay, this is the job that I really want to do, and I can see myself giving back and adding value. So for me, that drives my purpose. It's a motivation for me every morning.
How long has it been since you have joined Pro Bono SG?
It's I joined in 2015, so next year will be my 10th year.
year.
Yes.
Amazing. And Sadhana, a lot of the times, especially, you made this decision relatively early on in your career to leave commercial litigation to pursue pro bono work. What made you, I think you talked also a little bit about, stopping and reflecting and asking yourself, is this what you would really like to do for the rest of your life? And I think maybe some of us, we might justify by saying, oh, it's still early on in my career. Maybe one day I will get there. What made you decide that now is the time?
I think it's perfectly okay if you're not ready to make a swap, because then I guess your soul is telling you, maybe not now, you're not ready. But I feel like a lot of times we go through life asleep. We kind of just want to get through the day, and then by the end of it, we go to bed and we're like, okay, the day is
like
over.
autopilot.
Exactly. And we don't ask ourselves important questions like, is this my purpose? Is this what I'm meant to do? And rightfully so, because if every day you wake up and you say, is this my purpose? And you go into this, it's very emotionally heavy, So a lot of times we don't do that. But I do think that it's important to take a step back sometimes and just ask, like, is this where I envision myself in 5 years, in 10 years? Is this making me happy? Happiness is such an important emotion that we don't feel enough. And more so than happiness, also joy, right? What gives us joy?
Yeah.
Some people get through life, and I know a few of those people, saying money gives me joy, and even if the job doesn't make me happy, the money makes me happy, and that's perfectly okay as long as your eyes are open and you're awake.
And intentional about choosing it for this season in your life.
Exactly. But then there are others who can look beyond that and say, well, actually, it's not the money. I'm okay with a bit less, but I want to feel like I'm giving back and making a difference.
Wow.
And to those people, then it's important to start asking, what is it that you want to do and what would help you give back? Some of our volunteers at Pro Bono SG, they run full-time practices, and then to feed the soul, they also take on pro bono work as well. And that's perfectly okay.
You find what works best for you in this season.
Yes.
So what is it like, Sadhana, being in a male-dominated industry? What would you say are some of the biggest hurdles?
They're what I call microaggressions. Small things which I don't think is deliberate. I don't think people realize that they are doing it, but they do it because it's how they've been doing it all along, right? So for example, I tend to get questions about whether I'm going to have children, do I have a family, and it's well intended, I'm hoping, but I don't see why men aren't being asked the same questions. Men of my age who are not yet married or who are married, do we care whether they have children? Why is it that it's important for me to answer that question? I've also, been spoken over quite a fair bit. I think the general expectation is that if you have a louder voice, you can speak over the person who doesn't have as loud a voice. I've also, at a meeting, it's been assumed that I am the deputy or the junior, so
just because of your gender.
Exactly, yeah. So they'll speak to the male because the presumption is that the male is the boss, right? So these small things, again, like I said, I don't think they are deliberately being offensive or, and I don't think people themselves realize it, but I think it's the presumption sometimes that
I know it's
just
years
ingrained.
And years of biasness, layers and layers of biasness. And I completely also feel you when you say all of this, because I think as a female business owner, I also get that a lot. When we meet with investors or potential investors, right, they will always ask, oh, so what is your plan? How many more kids are you going to have? Because they expect that, and assume that it will slow us down or we may not be as effective during this period. So how do you respond then when you are in such situations where you are undermined of sorts?
I think in the past, I used to think maybe I need to power dress, like wear pants, make sure you wear heels, be taller than the men. That's the thought process, right? But I think over time, and with age, and now that I've mellowed a little bit, I feel like I've eased into myself and I've assumed an air of confidence about myself. I know who I am. I know what I'm about.
Self-assured.
I can walk into a room and even if they don't recognize my abilities and my position at the start, they will come to do it eventually. Because when I open my mouth and I speak, the quality of what I'm offering should speak for itself.
Yeah.
And I've come to find that actually does happen. And again, like I said, because people don't come out, with ill intentions, when they come to realize that, hey, actually, she knows. She's presenting everything. She knows everything.
She knows the shit.
Yeah. And then they focus on that,
instead. So let your substance and the work speak for itself too.
Yeah.
And you talk about the air of confidence. Sadhana, was that something that you were born with? What is it like, Because speaking to you, I would feel that, wow, Sadhana, you are one confident woman. Has it always been like that?
Definitely not.
Tell us.
Definitely not. We all have our insecurities and confidence issues. And I feel like sometimes, especially when we're younger, we're still finding ourselves, right? So when I was a younger lawyer, I look at like people like Mr. Singh, I look at some of the senior lawyers, I'm like, I want to be like that, I want to be like that, right? And then you kind of just try and model yourself after these different people. Or you think that that's the aspiration. And then I think, again, like I said, over time as you grow and you're allowed to grow. So I think to bosses, I would say, give your juniors the space, because once we grow, we may not be like this person or that person, but as we are, we can be quite powerful, quite strong, and we can be very different as leaders. And so I was given that space, and I think I will say I'm still trying to find myself. There are days where I still have trouble thinking or trying to determine what type of person I want to be.
Yeah.
But I think now I feel a little bit more comfortable, and I think the confidence comes from the fact that I've tried or explored various things, and I know what I feel comfortable with and what I don't.
Beautiful. And Sadhana, I think in the work that you do, you also work notoriously long hours and deal with high levels of stress. How do you cope with that? And did it affect your health mentally and physically?
Yeah, so I mean, lawyers in general
Yeah.
are known to work pretty long hours.
Yeah.
I do think to become a lawyer, it takes a certain type or quality of person, and there must be that tenacity in you to want to get there to that level of performance, right? So a lot of lawyers end up pouring a lot of themselves into documents, reviewing arguments, cases, and I'm no different. So I would spend I'm sit at my desk, I'll be glued there for like hours at a stretch, Some days I wouldn't go home, and I have told this story as well. It's quite notorious. I slept under my desk for a couple of days because I didn't want to go home. But I mean, of course, I've come to revisit this completely. But at the time, I think the idea was that if you just kept pouring yourself into your work, you would get better and better and better, right? So I did spend hours on end just sitting at my desk poring over documents, and I wouldn't exercise. I wouldn't consider eating well. I wouldn't sleep well.
So every waking hour was just spent on your work and documents and cases.
But again, like I said, you're metaphorically, you're kind of sleeping. You're just doing. You're not really thinking,
Right.
And I think some of the best lawyers, if you look at their trajectory, a lot of them spend some time deeply thinking about the arguments and the issues. And, it's not just like, I must complete everything and then I'll be a good lawyer. It's okay, now I've read these things. Let's take a step back. Let's think about the strategy. Let's think about the approach. I wasn't doing those things when I was younger. I was kind of just trying to complete all my tasks, right? So I think that kind of over the years accumulated, and I did start feeling the stress on my body. So I think sometime last year, I felt my body breaking down a bit, and I had a bit of a health scare. I also was not able to see after some time, right?
So you lost your sight.
It affected my vision a little bit. I didn't completely lose my sight, but I couldn't read because my eyes were affected by the health scare. So I then had to stop and then ask myself, is this the way I want to continue for the rest of my life?
Wow.
However long it may be, and I had to revisit a lot of things, because you can be completely passionate about something and still it can hurt you or harm you unless you draw that balance.
And boundary.
Yeah.
So what have you learned from the episode of, having, I would say it's almost like losing your sight, and that must have scared you. How long did it last for?
It definitely did scare me. But thankfully I had access to good healthcare and doctors, which I must add, some of my clients don't have access to. So that's problematic for me, and I do think we need to focus on that. But I think for me, the first lesson I learned was health is we always say it, right? Your health is your priority. And then we're like, okay, now that we've ticked that box of telling ourselves that, we do absolutely nothing to make it a priority, right? And you think, okay, if I go for the occasional run, if I eat a salad once a week, I'm healthy, right?
I feel better,
Yeah, I'm great. I got that lettuce in. But I don't think that's how healthcare works. And some of the more fundamental things like sleep, water, things like that, we kind of just don't focus on that. Another thing that I learned is, as women, our bodies are wired a bit differently, and we must celebrate that, but also pay more attention to that. So
tell me more, for example,
women just generally need more sleep. Right? Hormone balance is extremely important. Some women are extremely vitamin D deficient, they are iron deficient, right? And we don't pay attention to those things enough, right? We just start like, I'm losing my hair, it's all stress, you know? But the reality is, if you do a blood check, you'll find that certain things are deficient. We can work on that, right? So that's one of the first few things. As women, pay attention to your bodies a lot more. Your bodies are so hypersensitive. They will tell you everything you need to know about your body's health, feminine health especially. You can tell a lot from a feminine cycle, right? You can tell a lot of your bodily health from that. We just don't pay enough attention to these things sometimes because we are so busy. Sleep also, we look at some of the world leaders and we think some articles have been written, and I remember reading it. Some of the world leaders sleep 4 or 5 hours, they wake up at 5 a.m. and that's the way to go, right?
It's like a badge of honor.
Exactly, like a badge of honor or like a formula, right? Like to success. But I think in life, like sleep. Sleep a bit more, spend a bit more time dreaming, spend a bit more time allowing your body to unwind, to relax. Sleep is actually quite important. And the last thing that I've come to learn is exercise is so critical. And any kind of exercise is great. For women, I think weightlifting it's not going to make you bulky. You should consider doing it. By no means am I a physical trainer. I don't have any experience in the kind of science that goes behind it. But I am very mindful that a lot of times we avoid the gym because we feel intimidated. But I think I started actually working up the courage to going regularly, and I feel so much better. Just 1 to 2 months worth of exercise can do wonders for your mental health. And then thereafter, you would just want to keep going. So those 3 things I think are quite important.
What made you choose to focus, Sadhana, on pro bono criminal cases? What drives your curiosity behind, criminal behavior?
Yeah, I think the practice of criminal law is a very human experience. It's about understanding human emotion, what drives us to do certain things, how human beings react. And then we've created a system of laws to address that reaction. And you need people on both sides. You need prosecutors who will advocate on behalf of the victim and on behalf of societal expectations as to what proper behavior is, how society needs to be protected. You need that, and that's important. And you also need criminal defense lawyers who will advocate on behalf of the accused person in 2 areas. One is if the accused person is innocent, right? And I often ask people who question me, like, how can you do this? I ask them back, would you go to court alone to defend yourself against the force of the state?
Wow.
The government has provided money to public defenders, to prosecutors to prosecute you. And would you go alone, especially if they have experts, they have the police force? Like, how are you going to defend yourself? Do you know the law, right? So you do need someone who can advocate for them, especially if they're innocent. But you also need someone to advocate for those who may be guilty or who are guilty, in fact, but may not deserve such a high punishment. So we call that mitigation. And people don't know the law enough to mitigate on their own behalf. And they may sometimes end up saying things which may not even help their case, right? So sometimes I got clients telling me, but I was drunk,
Oh dear.
That's not a mitigating factor, right? So sometimes it's an aggravating factor as well. Judges may say, you caused yourself to be drunk, you should get a higher sentence, right? So as lawyers, it's our job to advise the client, to tell them what are good mitigating factors, bad mitigating factors. And it's my job also to review the cases and to propose a fair sentence for my client. I'm not trying to get my client off. I'm not trying to get them acquitted. I'm not trying to twist the law in any way. My job is to get a fair sentence and to assist the court to get there. I don't impose the sentence. It's the judge who imposes the sentence. The prosecution has its position. I have my position. And then we try and arrive at a position at the end of the day that's fair for this particular offense, for the victim and for the accused.
What is it that you wish that more people would understand about the struggles faced by the people who really need this pro bono legal aid?
Okay, I think those who need to understand already understand it. And then there are some people who are quite hardline, like kill them all, string them, hang them, To those people, I don't think there's anything I can say because they are pretty set in their notions. But I would invite people to really take a step back sometimes and to reflect on the factors that led this person to where they are. We must, as a society, we must be curious about the factors that gave rise to this incident.
Wow.
And if you do spend time with these people being accused persons and people who are involved in crime, you'll find that sometimes, or rather most of the time, there is a history behind them which reflects something much deeper. And then you start to wonder if we as a society, need to step up a bit more. I wouldn't say we've failed because majority of society is fine, right? But for example, you'll see people not having access to education at a very early stage. Even though education is affordable, some of them may not be able to go to school because they had to take care of a younger sibling while their parents worked, So even though it's mandatory for them to go, they've been registered, they can't turn up. Right? Some of them may have had to work from a very young age to supplement the family income. Some of them may have been abused themselves, right? Over generations.
Yeah.
And that carries on. Some of them are stuck in intergenerational poverty.
Yeah.
It just continues. The cycle never breaks. And once you're on a back foot, for you to play catch up and for you to then try and break that cycle, it's extremely difficult for most of them. And they've not known. They don't know a better world. They don't know a better life. Like what I said, I come from a stable family. I didn't know what it would look like to be in a family that wasn't stable. And likewise, people who've been stuck in families that have not been stable, parents who go in and out of prison, for example, not having a stable home environment, maybe not even having a home to go back to, a bedroom, for example. These guys won't know what it feels like to be in a stable environment.
Yeah.
So I think reflecting on that, for me, has been extremely important because it's given me a perspective and allowed me to access the more human aspect of me. I was once at a meeting with one of my clients. We were preparing for trial, and my colleague Prem and I had been sitting in at that meeting, and we had met with him. I think it was hours. We had like at least 30, 40 meetings with him already, just in the lead up to trial, taking him through documents.
Yeah.
And there was this one moment where he had said something. He can't read well, so he was reading something out and he had mispronounced a word. And all of us just burst out laughing. And it was like 2 minutes worth of just laughing nonstop. Our bellies were hurting. And he was laughing in prison and we were laughing on the other end of the video link. And then suddenly we all just stopped and there was that silence. And I realized like in that 2 minutes, we had that shared humanity where all of us were just laughing at something we all found so funny, and it was something we all had in common, right? And then we were brought back to that reality that, he was there and he was potentially facing years in prison, and we were on this side, and we would go home to our families. I would go back, I'd walk my dog, I'd spend my time reading a book, and our lives became so different. But in that one moment, I think I valued that shared humanity so much, because it showed me that, are we really very different?
Yeah.
Aren't we all looking for the same thing?
Wow.
Aren't we all looking to be happy and to have peaceful lives, So how do we help people who have been led astray get there? And by no means am I saying we justify the act, right? What I'm saying is, if we understand what led them there, can we help to fix these things to bring them back, right? So I guess that's where I'm coming from when I say let's try and understand or be curious at least about the factors behind what led them there.
I love that because I think so many times we only see the surface and we judge on the surface. Could you share with us, a particular case that maybe it was heart-wrenching for you, as you also dug deeper to uncover what is it that led to this behavior?
Yeah, so quite a number of cases we do involve a significant degree of violence. And I think the violence can involve, I guess, sexual abuse against children. So those cases tend to be quite hard. The violence can also involve traumatic injury to children, to women. And, I've had several questions, saying, how can you even do this? What kind of lawyer would want to take up this case? These people don't deserve any assistance,
or
any help, representation. Yeah. So I will say that it's not easy because if you just take a step back and as a human being, you look at a child, you think, who would want to hurt this child, right? But then as a lawyer, you put on a different hat and you recognize that you have a responsibility to the court and to the legal system to put forth the best arguments in defense. And that's where my role comes in. So some of the cases that I've dealt with that have been quite difficult. One more prominent case is the Swee case, in which the child had been killed and she was then hidden in a pot. Her name is Umaisha. Her name is quite well known because the judge decided to release her name quite rightfully. And she was then hidden under the
And she was
sink.
killed by...
Well, it was culpable homicide.
Culpable homicide,
Yeah, so she died at the hands of her father, and the mother then helped to hide the body. And what had happened was they had put it into a pot and they had burned it. And then they came to realize that that's really not a good way to dispose of a body. And then they wrapped it up and they put it under the sink for about 5 years. And then it was finally discovered, and she was charged with perversion of justice and also a bunch of other abuse charges as well for her other children. And she got the heaviest sentence that could have been imposed. It's considered to be one of the worst acts of perversion of justice. I think received about 7 years imprisonment for that one act. And then in total, she received about 11 to 14, I can't quite remember, but around there, because there were other charges as well. And so she, when I first met her, I think in my mind, everybody as a human being be like, how can you do this? It's your child, you know? And I think for some reason, we hold mothers to a higher standard. I guess we think like you held this child in your body for so long and then you give birth to her and, you know, you allow this to happen. So we assume that mothers should have this stronger maternal instinct, right? And so when I first met her, I mean, she's very unassuming. She's very small. She bounces off walls a little bit, you know, and she was very nervous. She had a good bond with her other children, and I mean, they missed her as well. And so when you're talking to her, you don't really get a sense that, oh, this is a vicious child killer, you know? You don't get that feeling, that sensationalism that's generally attached to this type of cases. When you talk to them, they're very much human beings. They're very much people, right? And she was remorseful. She wept through some of the interviews as well. But I mean, it's an offense and it's a pretty serious one, and it involved the death of a child. And so you must face the consequences. And that's not something that we tiptoed around. We were quite upfront with her and telling her that the consequences are going to be heavy. And I mean, due credit to her, she was willing to face them. In fact, she didn't even try and give any excuses for her involvement. But as we probed further, we discovered some of her background, you know, of abuse as well, that she too had been abused when she was younger, came from an unstable family unit. And, you know, there appeared to be some psychiatric factors at play as well, although we didn't quite explore that for some reasons. And ultimately, I mean, she was sentenced. Like I said, she received quite a heavy penalty for her involvement, and she didn't appeal it. She accepted it at face value. But I think the shock factor here for me was that, and it's not the first time that we've seen postmortem photos, but I think they included some postmortem photos of the child. And for me, that was shocking. I actually think about it quite regularly, almost on a daily basis, because you see the child, you know, and it does affect you. It does, you know, sort of play on your mind. And to that end, I really must say hats off to prosecutors who have to deal with these cases day in, day out, because they would see these photos and they would have to go through it. Judges as well, when, you know, you have to review the evidence and impose a sentence. And so I cannot imagine having to review this on the daily, because, I mean, these images can be seared into your brains and you carry it with you. And I do, you know, say a prayer for her regularly, because the child had promise and could have grown to give back to society, and that just didn't happen. You know, so for me, I think it's very important. I mean, when we see both sides, you can see from the victim's perspective, these were the things that had been lost in the process. But in the same breath, when I look at the mother, she has living children who love her, care for her, want to be with her. Her methods may have been wrong. She can be trained. She can be re-educated to re-enter society and to build bonds with her children. For better or worse, she is their mother. And they want to spend time with her. They want to be with her. And so how do we facilitate that process? How do we help her grow through this? How do we support her? You know, I think those are important questions that we need to start asking ourselves as she approaches her release date.
Wow. So do you think your job stops there, where after you have represented her, especially in trial, and then, you know, of course, there are many other cases and clients who also need your support, but how do you go back to revisit or see how you can support people that are underprivileged in that sense?
Yeah, so I think at Pro Bono SG, we call ourselves community lawyers. And the reason is because we see this marrying of the social aspects and the legal aspects. Most people, when they come to us, their legal problems don't exist in isolation. There's usually, especially when you approach a pro bono office for assistance, there's usually some social aspects that come into play financially, emotionally. Some of them come with mental issues as well. And so as lawyers, most of the time, or rather the approach in the past tended to be, okay, I can only deal with your legal problems. If you have these social issues, approach the Family Service Center, approach the CDC, or go talk to a therapist. And then we just send people along on their way. But I think over time, we came to realize that this may not be the best approach. And how about working together with social workers? How about integrating into the community so that we can provide services holistically, right? Because healing is a holistic process. You can't just heal in one area and then you still have this hanging over your head. Legal problems, I haven't done this, or I need to make an application. I don't know how to do it, right? And then, you don't have anyone helping you there. So we've come together and set up what we call community law centers. We have one in a temple in Tianta, Aukang, and we have another at an acupuncture low bono center called Realm of Tranquility.
Low bono.
Yeah, so they provide low bono
almost
or free.
Basic and no.
Yeah. So they provide the acupuncture service. So I often make a joke that, you go and heal your body. Then you got any legal problems, just pop over to our office and then we heal your legal problems as well. One shot,
A community of healers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we've set up in these two unconventional areas. They're very comfortable, lovely offices. And I always say, like at the temple, after we finish our work, we're going to pray for forgiveness. If I've done anything wrong, please give us a chance to make up for it. But I think our work, more often than not, is a work of service, and the temple is also a place of service. And that blend in purpose is always a very good thing, because it means we're moving towards the same goal.
That's beautiful. And I love that, the support network really transcends legal help and legal aid. Sadhana, you talked earlier also about how, sometimes you would bring these cases, client stories back with you. How do you deal with the emotional toll that comes along with the work that you do, and also especially in the face of severe injustice and hardship?
Yeah, so I think for me, one thing I guard against is desensitization. I try not to be desensitized by certain things, especially if it involves very serious acts of violence. I don't want to be the person that says, oh, okay, this is every day also like that lah, or like this happens every day, it's normal, I don't want to be that kind of person, because it's not normal, for people to be angry, for people to be violent. It's not normal for people to take drugs. We shouldn't accept that. We shouldn't normalize that type of violence. And so for me, I think I do take the time to reflect deeply on certain things that affect me, for example, and I don't stop myself from going through that the motion of feeling a certain way. I actually start thinking about it, but I don't just allow it to affect me. It doesn't just slap me in the face and I'm like, okay, I'm affected. I start actually thinking about why I'm affected, how I can approach this, what are some things I can do to improve, the way I'm feeling. And also I start thinking about what motivated the person to do something like that, what caused this in the first place. I feel like social media has kind of desensitized us a little bit, because it's so easy to pump out a video, right? You see a video of a slashing, you see a video of fights, and I think over time, people actually start going out to look for these type of things. I'm happy to say that I don't, because it does still affect me. When I see acts of violence, it does still make me feel uneasy, because I can tell that these are acts that are not, well, I suppose they're not right. They reflect a person who's quite ill, So I think being able to take a step back and just kind of think deeply about it is important. But another approach as well is to sort of leave your work at work, right? So I try by 7 p.m. I disconnect, and then I spend a lot of time with my dog. I love to go on long drives with her, go and cycle, spend some time going on walks. I do a lot of these types of things. I also am part of the SPCA. I am a board member, so I spend a lot of time doing that as well. For me, animals.
So giving back in different ways, serving different communities.
Exactly, yeah.
Wow.
And animals are like, they're healers. They're natural healers for us. So I absolutely adore spending time with my pets. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm also curious, Anna, was there a particular story of a client that really moved you and maybe even changed your perspective on the role that you play in your career, or even changed your perspective on justice system?
So I guess two stories I can tell. The first involved a man who had abandoned his dog at the void deck when the dog was unwell. Okay, and so my boss, knowing that I'm absolutely in love with my dogs, said, "I think you should do this.
You to take the case.
It will challenge you." So he assigned the case to me, and when I first read the facts of the case, I'm like, "Boss, no lah, I can't do this. This is just, it's too much even for me, right?" And I think he knew that was the challenge that I needed because as you know, I'm absolutely besotted with my dogs, and
I can tell.
yeah.
I can
So
sense.
to me, it's just with animals. There's absolutely no way. You must be a certain type of person to want to do this to an animal, right? Especially your own dog. You've taken care of him, and then you just abandon him at the void deck. What's going on, right? So he got charged, and I had to interview him, and he came for the first meeting with me, with his very old mother. I think she was like in her 80s or 90s, and she had trouble walking. And he himself had health issues as well. And he informed, basically he shared that he had not been able to care for the dog when the dog was unwell because he didn't have money to bring the dog to the vet. He had taken care of the dog for its entire life, and he had done so very well. The dog actually was healthy all the way till the end when the dog was older and developed some illness, which then caused an infection, right? And he kept trying to care for it with whatever medications he had, but he just didn't have enough money to bring it to the vet. And so he left the dog at the void deck, hoping. And he did it in front of a camera for some reason. And he was just hoping that someone would take the dog to the vet for him and help cover the costs. He wasn't tech savvy. He doesn't have Facebook. You can go online, you can make an appeal.
Yeah.
Someone would help you, but I don't think he realized he could. And even the mother as well kind of was weeping, and she was like, we really love the dog, but there was no way we could have supported him. I guess as someone from outside looking in, I'm like, but you could have done 10,000 different things, right? But you're not in that position. You're not the one supporting an elderly mother who can't walk. You're not the one who doesn't have resources. You're not the one who has to give up the dog. And he said he loved his dog so much. And you can see the passion, but he just couldn't afford it. So I had to put aside my judgment. And I think as a human being, it's very difficult to do that. We have a moral compass, rightfully so, and with that comes judgment, rightfully so, because without judgment you end up making wrong decisions. But I think I had to put that aside in order to advocate for him, and we managed to get him a warning for this after we explained his circumstances. And it was also established that the dog was already quite ill, and it wasn't something that could have been treated anyway, right? So I think we managed to get him a warning for that one. Another case that I think really changed the course of my life as well is a case which I worked on, one of the first few cases that I went to trial for, and it was a trafficking case. And the client was someone who had previously been involved in drugs and was now being charged with trafficking. And when how I was drawn into this case, I love to tell this story. My colleague had told me that there's this client who's very good looking. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll come. You know? After a while, of course, that faded into the background. That wasn't important. But when I first met him, I think what I was taken away with was definitely not his looks, but more so his passion in trying to prove his innocence. And I think we all come with our own preconceived set of notions, right? Like, drug consumer, repeat offender, confirmed did it, right?
Yeah.
That's the thought process most people have. But I tried to approach it from a different way.
Yeah.
And I asked him, like, what are your circumstances? Can you share a little bit more? And he informed that he had no choice but to, basically book or rent lodgings from someone, and the environment wasn't great, but he himself wasn't involved in drugs, and he was desperate to prove it to his family because they had they'd given up on him and they had disowned him. And he said, if I'm found guilty now for something I didn't do, they would disown him permanently. And so I mean, obviously we told him it's an uphill battle, but we took the matter to court and to trial. And it was heartwarming to see that as the days of trial progressed, more and more of his family members turned up.
Wow.
So the first day, no one was there. Second day, people started turning up. And then by the end of the trial, on the day that he actually got an acquittal, his entire family was there supporting him. And he fell to the ground and he was thanking God. And I turned around to look for him and he was not there. And I'm like, the moment he was acquitted, he just ran out of court or what, which was not possible because he had to be brought back to Changi prison to be, processed out. But I think to me, that was heartwarming because I recognized that my role as a lawyer is not just about helping him in court, but it also had an impact of helping him mend relations that may have provided him with a bit more support to move on in his life, with his family.
Yeah.
And I found that to be really moving, heartwarming for me.
What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about pro bono lawyers?
Okay, so I guess it's we are 6:30 lawyers, cannot find jobs anywhere else, some questions, where do we get our money, how do we get paid? I gave an interview, I think prior to this, we were being called like $1 lawyers, $2 lawyers. I think these are all interesting assumptions. I don't take offense to them. I think it's also because people don't know enough about it. And there are so many, recently there are so many articles, documentaries that have been released on the work that we do. I would just say that, my team and I, we're about 11 lawyers strong. Every single one of us approached this with a passion and rigor that, a lawyer in private practice would. This is not just another job, or it's not like, pro bono, we do it at the side, Even my volunteers as well, when we take on a case, it's because we genuinely feel for the cause. Pro bono work is hard work as well. I'm answerable to the judge. I'm answerable to the court. I can't put in a 6:30 performance because, like I said at the start, my reputation is so important to me. So I don't approach cases thinking, okay, this pro bono, I can give 30%, 50%. Every case is 110%, and my entire team approaches cases with the same mentality and mindset as well, because we are serving a human being. It's their life. It's an emotion, right? It's you are either guilty or not, and when you're guilty, you lose the right to your freedom. If it's a fine, then that's great. But if you can't pay the fine, you have to go to jail, So it's a very serious, I would say it's a very, very serious consequence. And so we don't take it lightly. We don't take our jobs lightly as well. We appreciate the impact that it has on our clients and the impact that it would have on their families. Imagine losing the sole breadwinner to prison. It's tough.
Yeah.
It can impact the family as well. And so we do take great care to make sure that our clients know as well that we're giving 110% to them, and to let them know that they're important too, and that we're not coming at this with judgment. I think to us that's so important, because while the world may come at it with a preconceived notion or judgment, or they may assume certain things about you, we're here to walk with you through this process, and we won't do that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What are some of the most valuable lessons you have learned from your clients?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question, because my clients, we always assume that we are the ones helping them, right? But I think you really learn resilience from your clients. You learn it's not easy to go through a court process. It's not easy to go through months and months of not knowing what's going to happen to you. Are you going to go to prison?
Yeah.
Are you going to, and going to prison itself is so harrowing, right? I think there's a very good documentary on, what life is like in prison. But some of my clients tell me, and you can see them losing weight as they're in prison. I see them at the start of when I'm first assigned, and then over the months, it's not that, they are well fed and all, I'm sure, but it's just the stress and the worry, and everything is taken away from you. You don't have control over your time. You're given a certain amount of hours to go out, and then you come back, and then there's lunch at a certain time. And so life changes completely for some of them. And even if you're on bail, you can't travel. Right? So a lot of them have their passports taken away, don't get to go on family holidays. It takes a lot of resilience, mental and emotional resilience, to get through that, uncertainty. So one thing I do take away is the mental and emotional resilience is so important. The other thing I take away from my clients is really, when you watch them go through it, a lot of them have to make difficult decisions, and a lot of them end up prioritizing their families.
Wow.
Right? I don't want to put my family through this. If the trial is going to be protracted, this is going to happen to them. I don't want to do that. I just want to finish this. I just want to move on with my life. I need to go back and work. So a lot of them end up making decisions that you may not personally understand or agree with. Yeah. So for example, if you're innocent, why plead guilty?
Take
right?
the plea deal.
Just claim trial, fight all the way. I have often said that to my client, right? But I think for them, their considerations are very varied because they recognize that if they drag this out, the stress on the family, the stress on the children tends to be excessive. So some of them say, I really can't do this to my family, and then they decide to plead guilty.
And even if they're innocent, they would decide to.
And they have that right to do so because they have the right to decide what they want to do. And so I think prioritizing family is something that I've learned from my clients as well.
Yeah. How do we create more awareness then to these hidden realities? And how can we as a society become more aware, cognizant, and empathetic to that?
So I've always wondered about that question because I think some people might come at it from the perspective that it's not my responsibility. Why should I care if someone else makes a bad decision? As long as I'm okay or I'm not involved in this, I'm fine. And I think as a starting point, I think everyone should care because you live in that exact same society, right? And other people's decisions may affect you. So as a starting point, it is your responsibility, right? So I think it's important to establish that because you see a lot of online comments that just say, throw them in jail, throw them in, but they can't be in jail forever.
Yeah.
Right? They are going to come out, and if we don't address some of the issues that led them to make this decision in the first place or led them to make the mistakes in the first place, then it's likely that they will repeat itself if they haven't been given enough support. And as a society, it's our responsibility to provide them with that support. So I really would encourage people to be curious about the factors that gave rise to such behavior. And once you have that curiosity, of course, it's not just, I want to know, I want to kepo, but it's also what can I do as a person who is part of this society? How can I help? And I often encourage my very young nieces, they are about 3 and 5, to ask why and to ask what can I do?
Right.
And from a young age, it's so important, but it should help when you see someone being bullied, go and ask why. Why are you doing this? Please stop. This is not right. Do you speak up when someone is being bullied? Do you speak up when you see something that is wrong? Do you speak up when you see an animal that's being abandoned? Do you speak up? And it's so important to speak up because I think sometimes we feel scared, right? Like if I speak up, will they think I'm kepo?
Yeah.
Will they think I'm intervening?
Will I get myself into trouble?
Yeah. But of course, I'm not saying resort to violence, go and fight and all that.
Yeah.
But speaking up is important. And speaking up to help is important. So another thing I always encourage people to do is to ask, do you need help? Can I help you? Is there something I can do for you? Even if you feel embarrassed by asking that question, you may not want to intervene immediately, but once the danger has passed, for example, you can always walk up to a person and say, I saw that you went through that. Do you need help? I think the idea that someone is there to ask you this, there's someone who is there to assist you in a moment of need, that is very empowering to people who feel very disempowered.
Yeah.
And to people who are in that situation of, trouble or who feel like they can't get out of it, asking for help is so important. I think from young, I have not been trained to ask for help. Right? As a kid, I think our standard response is just try and do. And if you cannot do, just keep quiet. Right?
Yeah.
But over time, I've grown to learn to reach out and to ask for help when I need it, And I think that lesson is something that took me some time to learn. I think for most of us as Singaporeans, we don't want to trouble other people.
Yeah.
Right?
Or
It's
like
paise,
or
correct.
embarrassed, feel bad.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's always important to reach out to ask for help. When you don't know, ask. If you need help, ask.
Wow.
And someone will come and help you. I think there are enough good-hearted, fair-minded Singaporeans who will step forward and say, yes, I will.
In your career and your experience, you've seen so much. What do you think would be your key message for society If you could have a billboard on the streets that all of us would see day in, day out, what would your key message be?
Oh, can I have multiple billboards?
Go for it, yeah.
I have so
You
many
can, multiple
key
billboards.
messages,
Yeah.
Okay, so for starters, I want to say just be awake, right? Don't fall asleep, because sometimes we see so many of these newspapers and articles, and we get a lot of these stories, and then you just kind of sometimes get very desensitized to a lot of things. And we say, yeah, always like that lah. There's so many such stories. What is happening to Singapore? You see a lot of these comments and stories, and people are reading and they're processing, but they're asleep at the wheel because they're not asking questions, right? They're not asking, why is this happening? What can we do, right? And it's always, government never do, police, what are they doing? There are all these questions, but it's about asking what you can do. So being awake to that, right? And the second message on the billboard, I would say, is do not judge until you have walked a mile in someone's shoes, right? So it's always easy to throw stones, right? It's always easy to cast aspersions. It's always easy to judge behind a screen, for example. But I think when you've entered into that person's shoes and you've gone through their experiences, you've grown through it, you will come out with a very different perspective. And so I think it's always important to not come at things with judgment. Of course, I'm not saying completely alter your moral compass to the point where you have no perspective or views on certain things. But I think if you want to take a view, it must be through the lens of empathy. You must be able to empathize with a person and recognize that it's a human being that you're dealing with. And I think if you take that approach in life, you'll be okay,
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And, when the going gets tough, is there a quote or saying that you hold true to that keeps you going and keeps you putting one foot in front of the other?
I think for me, right, I will just quote my deputy head, just do.
Just do.
Yeah. Just get it done. Just do it. we cannot quote Nike because copyright, so we just cut it short. Just do. Yeah, because what is the alternative? You just put your head down and you just get the job done, and you don't compromise on the quality, you don't compromise on the standard. But someone has to do this, right? And by no means am I saying we are heroes and we're taking up. No, definitely not. In fact, this is a job and we're doing our jobs and we will do it well, right? But when it gets tough and, the long nights when we're at trial and things are just so difficult, you wake up and you start preparing at 3 a.m. in the morning, you open it and you're like, why the hell am I doing this? If you start spiraling and questioning that, you don't focus on the right things.
Yeah.
So you just wake up open your book and you tell yourself, I've got to do this and I'm just going to do it.
Amazing.
Yeah, and you just get it done.
Yeah. And for those of us who are watching you and listening to your story and journey, and we're wondering how can we support you and your team in the work that you're doing, how can we come in to understand more and to also support?
That's a fantastic question. We're always looking for volunteers, supporters, donations. You can visit our website, probono.sg. You can also support us by volunteering with us in terms of if you can speak a certain language, for example, we're always looking for translators. We also need volunteers for some of our events as well. So please just write in to us if you want to assist us. We are also always grateful for donations. We are a charity, of course, and we run on donations as well as grants given to us by the government as well. And so any donation would be much appreciated.
Thank you so much, Sadhana, for coming, for sharing so openly and generously as well. We really enjoyed this conversation with you. So thank you, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.